This week it is Day of the Dead, the third and final installment in George Romero's original Living Dead trilogy. Released in 1985, it was of course written and directed by George Romero, with a master of gore effects Tom Savini returning and delivering what is surely his magnum opus of gore. Day of the Dead is a film that on release received a mixed reception, but has over the years gone on to receive retrospective praise and a cult following, to the point it's often cited as many people's fave of the series, including by Romero himself. Having rewatched it for the purposes of this review, I can safely say it is a fantastic film and you should absolutely watch it, but for me, it is easily the weakest of the original Living Dead trilogy, for the following reasons. Firstly, the plot is somewhat limited. In fact, there is barely a plot to describe. The zombie outbreak has now spread to the entire world off camera, with only small pockets of society and government clinging on in secure bunkers and bases. It is in one such bunker where we find ourselves in Florida, where the increasingly dictatorial army clashes with the misanthropic scientists trying to find a cure, or at least tame the zombies so that they can be of some limited use to the survivors, all whilst the largely disinterested civilians just want to run away to an island, as they don't really truly believe in either of the former group's ability to form a solution. Of course, it all goes horribly wrong in the end and pretty much everyone ends up getting munched on. Other than the opening and ending scenes, it's a one-location film, that being an underground missile silo, which in reality was the Wampum mine. This does offer the narrative a claustrophobic air and atmosphere to it, and lends a hand to the increasingly fraught tensions between the various factions that largely fuel the narrative, as the zombies are bar a few tame ones that the doctors are experimenting on, and a corral of zombies kept for such experiments, absent from most of the 100-minute runtime. Originally, Romero had planned for this to be a sweeping epic of a film, describing it as the Gone with the Wind of zombie films. But due to fears of not being able to achieve an R rating, or having to water down the violence to do so, the budget was halved from $7 million down to only $3. This meant that the script had to be written and rewritten a total of 5 times to meet the production company and the budgetary needs, plus those of Romero himself, who had final edit approval. Much like the prior films in the series, this one leans heavily into the social commentary and satire, but for me, it's not quite as thematically strong as in either of those prior films. With the original Night of the Living Dead being an obvious allegory for the Vietnam War, racism, and the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and Dawn of the Dead satirizing the increasingly rampant consumerism of the 1970s rather perfectly. Here the theme is society and its inability to communicate and work with each other, with the fact that if we could work together then we'd be in a much better place. But as it is, our inability to do so will ultimately lead to our downfall, which after the last 2 years seems fairly prescient, and the narrative does a reasonable job of representing the social commentary. There is one fairly major problem: the characterization of the separate group. Everyone, except maybe our main protagonist Sarah, played by Laurie Cardile, is totally unlikable. This makes it difficult to really root for anyone to succeed. You are probably gonna want 98% of the people in this film to be zombie chow. Firstly, you have the army led by Joseph Pilatos' character Captain Rhodes, who himself is a hideous human being obsessed with keeping hold of and extending his power and authority, even if that comes at the expense of not supporting and even going as far as murdering or abandoning the doctors and civilians, who he sees as drains on his resources and men. His underlings and he are also openly sexist and racist throughout. It's impossible to really root for anything but them to get eaten. The chief doctor, named Frankenstein, because of his freakish and ghoulish experiments on the zombies, is also entirely detestable, both misanthropic and kind of like a Victorian missionary, so convinced of his civilizing mission, he will accept any form of cruelty to be inflicted on others to achieve it. So again, it won't come as much of a surprise to find out I also kinda hoped he would die. Which leaves us with the civilians, who come in the form of a pilot and a radio operator. Both of them aren't detestable, but they aren't ever really given enough screen time for you to care about or like them. They also don't seem to care if either the army or the scientists come up with a solution to the zombie plague, or more to the point, believe they are capable of doing so. In fact, one openly says he thinks it's divine punishment, and he just wants to flee to a deserted island and soak up the rays until his days are done. The radio operator is a raging alcoholic, addictions and other social failings being movie shorthand for person you shouldn't really root for, so again they aren't the most likeable or relatable of characters. Hell, I'd go as far as to say the only person who is, beyond Sarah, is Bub, a tame zombie, who shows signs of regaining his humanity with his ability to utter basic sentences, salute, and use a telephone. Probably even more importantly, his final act of revenge on Captain Rhodes in retaliation for his murder of his tutor, Dr. Frankenstein. This is in stark contrast to the original and especially Dawn of the Dead, where you really do care about the characters and want them to survive. There is an argument to be had that this is intentional, to show that humanity are the real monsters, in contrast to Bub, an actual monster who shows some humanity. Also, so that when it all inevitably goes horribly wrong, the deaths are even more crowd-pleasing than they would have been. None of the above is really helped though by the fact that the acting here ranges from fairly solid to unintentionally hilariously bad. Anthony DeLeo Jr.'s performance as Salazar really underlines this, as he's a pivotal character to the narrative, but man, his acting is atrocious. I could never really take him seriously. That's not to say I don't enjoy Day of the Dead, it's actually a very good, very entertaining, and as I said before, a fairly tense, very dark and nihilistic film. It's just not as great as the masterpieces that preceded it in the Living Dead series. Plus you've always got the deaths, and what deaths they are, because Tom Savini outdoes himself here, providing us with a series high point in terms of practical effects. We see zombie innards fall out on the floor, someone has their head ripped off as their screams get ever more high pitched, and the final death is that of Captain Rhodes being ripped in half. They are some of the most glorious practical effects you are likely to see. Just top-notch gloop and gore. It's just disgusting, and I love it. Day of the Dead must have hit some form of collective nerve because it has been remade, not once, but twice. Day of the Dead in 2008, which I have absolutely seen and even own on DVD, and I can't remember a single thing about it, so I guess that says everything you really need to know about that. And 2013's Day of the Dead Bloodline, which I actually recently watched on Netflix, and frankly it is god awful. Not the good kind of god awful, the oh god what am I doing with my life watching this utter turd of a film kind of awful. Avoid at all costs if I was you, as it's 90 minutes of your life. You could have been cheese grating your eyeballs, and it would have been a more pleasant experience. So that was Day of the Dead, a way darker, more nihilistic film than either of the two films that precede it in the series, but ultimately, I think not as great as those two flicks due to its slightly weaker themes and especially characterization, even if the special effects are a series, and for Savini, possibly a career high point. You should definitely go out and watch it if you haven't already, and if you have, go and rewatch it.